Hey guys, how's it going? This is part 2 of our hanging basket series. In the first video, I talked more about the basics, like what material of pots you can find, what size, the pros and cons between all of those things, what kind of soil, how many plants you should be planting in each hanging basket based on what size it is. We will put a link down below if you want to watch that video, if you want to brush up on your hanging basket details, or if you're a beginner and just don't quite know where to start, that might be a good place for you to start watching. In this video, I wanted to talk more about plants. So I've surrounded myself with as much color as possible. I want to talk about what's compatible planted together, what you can plant in full sun versus full shade versus somewhere in between, and just share some of my favorites with you. And I did mention in the first video kind of a rule of thumb to follow in terms of how many plants to use. In a 12 to 14 inch basket, you use 3 to 5 plants. In a 16 to 18 inch basket, you use 5 to 7. And the number you actually end up with in each basket will depend on the growth habit of your plant, because some will get huge, like a Vista Supertunia. They get really big, so you don't need to use as many, as opposed to like a Bacopa that wants to stay a little bit smaller. You'd have to use more of those. You also want to consider what kind of maintenance you want in the end. I'm assuming that most of us for hanging baskets want them to be as low maintenance as possible, because we're already having to water them on a daily, sometimes twice daily basis, depending on what size they are and how hot it is outside. So, consider looking at the tags when you go to pick out your plants. Make sure that they don't need to be deadheaded. That's why I go for plants like Supertunias and Superbells, because I don't have to spend any time out there picking off old dead flowers to make them look pretty. That's huge for me. You also want to really be honest with yourself on how many times you actually want to be watering this thing. Like if you're the type who thinks, you know what, I can water it once a day and that's it, even when it's really hot, I know myself and that's, all I'm going to be out there to water it. So you want to pick plants that can handle a little bit drier conditions if that is you. So plants like Superbells, Diamond Frost Euphorbia, Lantana, all of those type of plants like to dry down just a little bit, like have the soil dry out a little bit between waterings before you water them again. So that's a great one. You also want to make sure that if you live in a really hot climate, that the plants are heat tolerant. The tags on the plants are a wealth of information, and I just highly recommend you reading those tags as you're trying to pick out things for your pots. So now I'm going to get into the different light requirements and what some of the things are that you can use in each one of those type of situations. I'm just going to list off some of the most popular ones for each one, as well as some of my favorites. Also, I should mention that most of the plants I'm talking about today are annuals. The first category I want to talk about are sun lovers, and our favorite in that category are petunias. Everybody loves petunias. The amount of color you get from those plants is just amazing. I prefer Supertunias because they're really good performers and they're self-cleaning, so you do not have to deadhead them. That is super important for me. I do a lot of containers and I don't want the extra maintenance. But not all trailing petunias are created the same. Not even the Supertunia line are created the same. So you can have a Supertunia and then a Supertunia Vista. The Vista series, they grow huge. They're wonderful landscape plants even. If you've got a little blank spot in a flower bed and you need to fill it up quick, plant a Supertunia Vista, because they will spread out and do wonderful. Like I could plant just 3 Supertunia Vista bubblegum in an 18-inch hanging basket and they would put on an amazing show, or just like one in this size of pot and you would have an amazing show of color. If you're planting a Supertunia Vista in a pot, you probably don't want to put it up with another plant that isn't as vigorous of a grower. Like there's a beautiful Superbells and it's this petite growing, beautiful pink with white edges flower. I love it, but it just wants to stay a little bit smaller. If you put that one next to a Vista bubblegum, that bubblegum is going to want to take over really fast. And Superbells are actually my second in the sun loving category, also known as Calibrachoa or Million Bells. They look like a little mini version of a Supertunia. There are so many different colors and variations of these, and I do have really good luck with these in drier conditions. They prefer to have their soil dry a little bit between watering. So this is great for those of you who want to be a little bit more hands-off with your watering. And if you feed them consistently, they just are full of color. I mean, look at this plant. Look at how beautiful and how full of color that plant is. The next one are trailing verbenas, and I've used them for many, many years in my sun combination planters. This right here is a Superbena Royal Plum Wine. I used this alongside Supertunia Vista bubblegum last year, just trying it out to see if it would keep up, and it did. It was a beautiful kind of, the bubblegum was probably the main color, but this one popped up through it all over, and it was a beautiful contrast, that deep pink with the bright pink. And then we used Superbena Large Lilac Blue up in our hay racks along our front fence line last year, and that was the predominant color that we saw. and it bloomed. Like, the bloom to foliage ratio was insane. There was so much color on those plants. I'm going to use them in more pots this year. And I think too, the key for all of these things to be in major bloom and to grow really well is to feed them right. So I do feed them a water soluble fertilizer once a week, which we'll talk about that in our third part of this video series, which is more about care and maintenance. Next is lantana. I do not have any examples in front of me right now, but they are a heat-loving annual that like it to be a little bit drier. I mean, you could put those alongside super bells and you'd have a really happy mix of plants. They don't get enormously draping, but they will kind of fill up the sides and drape just a little bit and just be a beautiful kind of crown to everything else that's kind of coming down a little bit further. And they tend to bloom like on a little bit of a stalk with a little ball kind of spherical bloom on the end, and they come in a bunch of really fun bright tropical colors. Geraniums are another sun-loving annual that are great, more for a centerpiece if you've got a low hanging basket, and those of course are a classic. I mean, you can get them in all different kind of colors and they just fill in the top here. The thing about geraniums is you do have to deadhead them somewhat. They're not as bad if you were to have to deadhead a calibrachoa or a petunia, but you still do need to go in there maybe on a weekly basis and pop off any spent bloom heads. The next couple are lobelia and bacopa, and those, for most people in a little bit more mild climates than I live in, do really well in full sun, and they're beautiful. I kind of consider them a little bit more of an accent plant in a hanging basket instead of something that's going to get huge and be like the star of the show, but they will kind of intermix and intermingle with all the rest of your flowers and really be beautiful. In our area where we have no cloud cover, no humidity, and really intense heat, they cannot take our really hot afternoon sun like right at the end of the day. So we do have to provide them a little protection there, but they can take quite a bit of sun up to that point. The next one is lemon coral sedum, and that plant is so versatile. I used it in so many different applications last year. In the hay racks on our front fence, I used it in our leaf motif urns, just alone as its own gorgeous plant. I just loved those containers last year, the gorgeous simplicity of them. I used it in the landscape. They were getting all kinds of different types of water. Like when they were all by themselves, I was able to really back off on the water. They did great. They kept up with our other plants in the front hay racks in terms of watering. Like, none of them rotted, which I was surprised because in the heat of summer, we were watering those baskets for 15 minutes twice a day. So that plant, those sedum roots, were getting a ton of water, yet they still performed. Which kind of leads me into the opposite plant. So there's sweet potato vine, which like to be consistently moist at all times when it's hot. They are a beautiful foliage accent in a container, beautiful in hanging baskets because they are dramatic. They will do like the most dramatic drape ever, but they do want that consistent moisture. So pairing them with your super bells, something like that, is a little bit more risky because one of the two plants probably won't be happy. These won't be happy to be consistently wet, and the sweet potato vine will not be happy if it dries down a little bit. Next are euphorbias. I have the most experience with the diamond frost variety. I'm going to try a couple of different diamond varieties this year. I'm super excited about because this one did so well for me last year. I mean, you can see how it's growing in this container right here. We've got Super Tunia Royal Velvet and the Bordeaux, and the diamond frost just creates this beautiful ethereal mound up top. Kind of acts like a lantana in a way, to where it'll kind of come out and be this beautiful kind of crown on the plant while everything else will do a little bit more of a drape. I had it paired alongside Desert Plains Pennisetum, like I had planted a few around that, and then Super Bells White, and it was the most gorgeous container. I think it was my favorite container on the whole entire property last year. I'm going to do something very similar to that in a couple of new pots we're going to put out on the west side of our house this year. I'm very excited for it. Next are alyssum, and these are different type of alyssum than you might be familiar with, that you can buy in like the 4 or 6 packs that kind of just trail on the ground a little bit. These grow huge. So this one's called White Knight. There's Frosty Knight, Dark Knight, Snow Princess. They just grow massive, like huge plants, and they will do a beautiful trail out of a hanging basket, but they do really well in the landscape as well if you have bare areas you need to fill in the sun. And the last 3 I want to talk about are just foliage plants. So I've got a Goldilocks Creeping Jenny right here that do a beautiful dramatic drape. I mean, just like a sharp drape out of the edge of a pot. Instead of doing a bunch of filling, they just kind of create this beautiful drape down below. And I love the color of this one. I love the bright pop of that kind of chartreuse green. There's also Dichondra Silver Falls, which I'm going to be using a lot of this year. Beautiful, frosty, icy blue foliage, and it can take a little bit drier conditions, so a great one to use with your super bells and your diamond frost euphorbia. And then licorice vine, helichrysum, is also a wonderful plant, and it's very versatile in terms of light. It can take full sun and it can take quite a bit of shade as well. So all of those plants really prefer full sun to perform the best. And no matter where you live, if you're not providing those plants with at least 6 to 8 hours of sun, they're just not going to perform as well. So if you have a basket of flowers that you bring home and you think, well, I put it in the sun, it gets 4 hours, that's just not quite enough, and they'll get kind of spindly, they won't perform as well, you won't have as many blooms. So now I'm going to move to the opposite end of the spectrum and talk about plants that can thrive in a really shady location. So anywhere that receives less than 4 hours of sun in a day. And this list isn't quite as long, but there really are some beautiful things. I've seen some gorgeous hanging baskets for shade. So some really fun flowers that you can use are Terenia. It's the wishbone flower. I really think that they're unique in the way they're shaped. They're not something that you see in every single basket, and they come in several different colors. I do love the white and the blue shades. I think that those are just so pretty. There's also Browalia, which will probably want the higher end of the spectrum on sun. So if you can give it that 4 hours, I think they would perform the best, but there's some beautiful blues and whites that you can use in that sort of situation. I've also used Browalia out in the landscape and they've done well. You can also use Creeping Jenny, which I talked about in the full sun section, but this one is very versatile and you can use it in the shade section as well as the licorice vine and sweet potato vine. There's a sweet potato vine called Black Heart that does especially well in a shady location. In fact, it kind of prefers it, and it's just the most striking foliage. And then you could use the classic impatiens or begonias, which do provide a lot of color, a lot of foliage interest, and several different growth habits as well. You'll find trailing begonias, begonias like Rex begonias that have beautiful colored foliage. You don't even need flowers when you have foliage that looks that good. You could also use heucheras. Heucheras bring a huge amount of interest into an arrangement with the color of their leaves. Ferns are wonderful to use as kind of a centerpiece that they kind of come out and like provide a lot of interest up top. We also use trailing ivy as a beautiful foliage draping plant. I love the look of ivy with like white impatiens and maybe a fern coming out the top. It just looks so classic. And the last one I can think of that we use a lot of are coleus, and they're so versatile. There's the Color Blaze series that can actually take full sun in more like humid climates. In our climate where we're really dry, they do need a little protection in the afternoon, or they can take a lot of shade. They're just beautiful that way in that you can use them in multiple different locations. And I use mine in the landscape and in baskets. There's one called Chocolate Drop that does a little bit more of a trailing kind of action, and it's got smaller leaves. And I cannot wait to use that one more in containers this year. So those are a list of some of the plants we use in shade hanging baskets. And now I want to talk about the area between full sun and full shade. It's a little bit hard to explain because it's very subjective to where you live. Every area is a little bit different, because you can have full sun in Arizona where it gets 120 degrees and bakes everything, or you could have full sun in the Pacific Northwest, kind of in a more coastal area where you have cloud cover intermittently, you have more humidity, more rainfall coming down. Those two full suns are completely different. So like in Arizona, you can't put a full sun hydrangea in the ground because you know that it's gonna bake that hydrangea. But in the Pacific Northwest, you can put it in full sun and that hydrangea is going to thrive and do beautifully. So rule of thumb, full sun plants want 6 to 8 hours of sunlight at a minimum to do well and produce a lot of flowers. Part shade, part sun plants want 4 to 6 hours of sunlight, and full shade plants want 4 hours or less of sun to do well and not have their foliage get scorched. So knowing that and kind of knowing your area, if you have a basket full of sun-loving plants like this one right here, in Arizona you probably want to give it its 6 to 8 hours of sunshine in the morning hours and then give it some protection once it gets baking hot in that hottest part of the afternoon. But in Pacific Northwest, you would want to flip-flop that, and maybe if it's a spot that gets a little bit of shade in the morning but it gets its more intense sunshine in the afternoon, that's where you put the basket so that the plants receive as much sun as possible. And I think in the Midwest, you could pretty much put the plants anywhere and they will grow. Every time we go to the Midwest, I am just so jealous at how beautiful everything is. They do have much higher humidity than we have here in Eastern Oregon because we're high desert, but their plants just, oh, they're just so beautiful. And if you're still not sure where to put your basket, I would ask somebody at your local garden center, because they will have more information that's really pertinent to your exact location. It's very helpful to listen to people who garden where you garden and like glean some knowledge from them. The last thing I wanted to talk about was if you have no idea where to start, because I just gave you a whole bunch of plants and it can be overwhelming when there's so many choices. You can go to provenwinners.com, click on the tab that says gardening ideas, and then click on container recipe search. There is a filter there where you can type in what kind of pot you have, if it's a window box, a hanging basket, just a regular container. Then you can filter it even further, like what size it is, or if it's full sun or part sun or whatever. And then you hit search and it'll populate all the different combinations that they've put together that on an average do really well in those type of situations. And then you can just look at all those pictures and see what they've put together. It's a really good learning place, and I look through it all the time for inspiration. So you can copy something that they have already put together that you like the looks of, or you can say, well, I like that plant and that plant. I think that those will do really well together based on everything else I'm seeing. And so I went through and I picked out like 3 or 4 of my favorite recipes that they have on their website. The first one is called True Beauty, and it has Supertunia Blue Skies, Supertunia Royal Velvet, and Superbena Stormburst. It is beautiful. I love purples and blues though in my garden, so that one, like I saw it, it just spoke to me. I'm going to be doing a few arrangements that look really similar to that this year. The next one is called Strawberry Sauce, and you guys who have watched our videos might be a little bit surprised to hear me say that because there's red in this arrangement. I don't typically do a lot of red in my garden, in flowers anyway, and it's got Superbena Royal Romance in it, which is a really deep red, but I find that it's more of a pink. It's a cool red, so it goes really well with pink and everything else I have in my garden. It's not really a warm, hot red. And they've paired it with Superbell's Strawberry Punch and Laguna White Lobelia. Now the Laguna White Lobelia in our area, I'd have to put it in a spot that got that morning block of sun because it doesn't like our afternoon sun, but the whole recipe all together, all those plants mixed together, they just look like strawberry sauce. It looks like a happy, like Valentine's arrangement. I just love it. The next one is called Sunkiss, which has Superbell's Tangerine Punch, Supertunia Honey, and Sweet Caroline Red, Sweet Potato Vine. And I love this mix because it's one that can take you from summer all the way through fall. It has all those warm, beautiful fall cozy colors that look beautiful with pumpkins and corn stalks. And the last one is Sweet as Honey. And like I said earlier, there's an arrangement I wanted to show you that included both Superbell's Lemon Slice, Diamond Frost Euphorbia like this here, and Superbell's White. So those 3 together create a beautiful, bright, cheerful arrangement that I just love. So anyway, if you're at a loss, I would definitely go to provenwinners.com and check that out. We'll put a link down below, and that's very helpful to even just get your juices flowing and get you thinking about it a little bit more as we enter the season of planting all of these beautiful things. So I hope this video is helpful to those of you guys, especially who are just starting out trying to plant things together and figure it out. And just know that I experiment every single year. Some of them are successful and it's awesome and you learn a lot from that, but I learn a lot also from the failures. I have failures about every year. I try something out that just doesn't jive together, but like I said earlier, that's part of the fun for me. I like to try things out. It's just kind of part of the gardening experience. And sometimes you can put things together that are compatible and something happens, weather happens, or whatever. It's just the way gardening goes. So anyway, thank you guys so much for watching this video, and we will see you in the next one. Bye.